Okay, now you can start.
Okay, great. This is the Strategic Planning Committee. It is February 17th. We have a lot to cover tonight. The materials were sent out beforehand. The way that I think we are going to go through this evening is first we're going to go through the calendar. And I want to try and make sure that the next 3 dates the majority of us can attend. This is fluid, obviously, so we can make iterations if we need to. And then I will turn it over to Susan and Dennis to discuss what was done over the last 6 weeks. And to wrap it up, what I think that we should do is really develop a statement of a strategic objective so we know everyone is on the same page and we are very clear on what we want to accomplish. So if everybody can just pull up that calendar. I don't know if somebody doesn't have it, we can probably pull it up on the screen as well. But it's pretty aggressive, but it's definitely doable after speaking to Susan and Dennis. The goal tonight is to talk about all of the internal type of issues and documents that have been created. Once that is done, next meeting, we hope to invite the directors to talk about their short-term and long-term capital needs, and then convene afterwards. And it might even be the next meeting if time goes long, to actually map out, a 5-10-year plan. In addition to this, when I was talking to Susan and Dennis and we were talking about future facilities, that planning has to happen sooner than later. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a long process, and they had the idea to have Joe Chuney actually present what he thinks the steps should. And actually, I spoke to John about this also a couple weeks ago. We're lucky that we have some experts, on staff or on council that can talk about that. So I think it's a good idea to actually invite Joe to come and say, this is what the RFP is going to look like. This is how long it's going to take, and then go from there. And then that April meeting would be actually to finalize that capital asset plan and just and keep discussing the facilities piece. I already know that one member said they could not meet on March 17th. So I wanted to change that to March 16th. Is that doable for everybody?
Let me check.
I'm not sure what's going to, well, this is evening. I should be okay.
I'm looking.
I'm all right on the 16th.
So am I.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm good.
And then that April 14th meeting, does that look okay for everybody so far?
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm going to be out of town that weekend. All right, April 4th, you said?
14th, it's a Wednesday.
April 4th is Sunday. Okay, sorry. I'm here.
I'm good.
Okay, so right now we'll keep it to March 16th and April 14th, and I'll have Kelly send out reminders so they can.
Yeah, that's good.
Get put on calendars.
Then also for the March 16th meeting, you'd want to remind Kelly to invite
The directors.
Chief Perko and Joe Chuney and Jeff Corney.
Yeah, I was gonna call all of them personally and tell them what we were gonna do and invite them.
Okay.
There is one possible conflict for some people. April 15th is an important day.
What? You want to be your tax?
You mean Israel Independence Day? I think it's that.
Joe Morrissey around. I see that.
Okay, good. I'm going to turn it over to Susan and Dennis now to discuss the organizational charts for the city and the departments, the compensation ranges, and also the job descriptions that were completed.
Okay, so I'll start off first, just with all the job descriptions were sent. So, and again, this goes back to really building the foundation of the compensation analysis, and how that comes out is, again, that all begins with job descriptions. And then before you can evaluate and rank positions, you need to understand the breadth and scope of the positions and the relationships of those positions within the city organizational structure. So we began the compensation review by doing all the first reviewing and updating all the job descriptions that were sent out. And those job descriptions were shared with all the directors of each department. And that was important. That's an important part of the process, because I don't know, nor do I understand every position in the city. And so then it also gets the director's buy-in and it gives each director ownership of the job descriptions that come out of their department. And so then once I did a draft, all the drafts were sent to each director of every department, and it covered all now, and this was all full-time non-bargaining positions that we were talking about. Unions are covered under contract, and part-time is something we can handle separately, but it was really important to get the full-time non-bargaining positions. And then all the directors gave feedback for all of those job descriptions. Any changes that they made to the job description, I accepted those changes because they fine-tuned it, they added some items. And then once I received those back, then the mayor and I had met on 2 different occasions. The first one, we did a read through of all the job descriptions and talking and sharing some ideas. Does anyone, I'm sorry, I have a phone number coming up, 932-9704, but it's no name. Anyone?
It might be Dina Goulder. She lives over on Claridge Oval.
Okay, I'll admit, but if I get another phone number, then I might.
I think she's bored,
We'll see if they,
wanted to come to city meetings.
well, we might want to just ask, just because I don't want. to have-
No, I know her phone number. That is hers.
That is her? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, so then the mayor and I met. So we went through it just to read through, talk about some of the issues, bring up some of the maybe something a director had or a question. And we met a second time, and the mayor went through it once again. And then if any directors had anything specific, and then the mayor, these are all what was submitted to you, approved job descriptions. So the mayor has approved those job descriptions. So, so then the next step will be taking those. Once we wanted to meet with the committee, and then the mayor will be sharing with the administration that, okay, here's all the job descriptions that are on file now with the city. So then once those job descriptions were reviewed, revised, discussed, then we began to evaluate across the departments. And that's when we, so this, by creating these all the job descriptions, I then also requested from all the directors to give me each of their organizational charts. Those were also forwarded on to you. So we have a main city, an overall city organizational chart, and then each department is broken down. So so that was also reviewed and approved by the mayor. And then based on that, once all of that was done, then we could evaluate across the departments. And then that's where you get into the compensation scale that was sent out. One had just the ranges, and then the other one did identify the positions. Because if you notice then in the job descriptions, it is identified, the comp scale is identified in that by the letter that coordinates with that scale or that level in the scale. And then in leveling the positions, that's when you evaluate the scope, the responsibility, the education, and other credentials. in the, that are necessary to perform each job. And then lastly, we surveyed across the market for cost comparisons. Other cities were used as well as non-government agencies, because when you are trying to get a true market, to really survey the market of what jobs are worth, it's good to get that balance of and so we used several different sources to get those cost comparisons. And to the extent possible, we then align these position titles. And that's to help keep consistency across the departments and throughout the city. So for example, all administrative assistants are grouped in one, are grouped in the scale. Now, that doesn't mean they all make the same amount of money, because they may differ. That's why we have that range that goes from 80 to 120, because if somebody might have a little bit more education or a little bit more experience, they're still in the same range, they're still at the same level, but they may vary throughout that range. Same thing was with directors and with chiefs, and they were those types, when I say similar positions, leveled across the departments. And then the positions were then slated onto the comp scale. And that's pretty much how we did it. So if anyone has any questions or. Now, just so everyone understands too, as far as council is concerned, job descriptions and the organizational charts are administrative. And as I said, the mayor has approved those. But a compensation scale, since you are dealing with money, and money has to be appropriated in the budget for those positions, that is something that you would, it is good for council to approve that, the comp scale, so that in any future hirings, you know that if somebody comes in, they are, you know, the range that they can get hired in. Now, if somebody for some reason was to extend that, and again, with an 80% to 120, you really should be able to fit somebody within that appropriate range. But that doesn't mean it can't be changed. It's just that that's something then that would have to either go, should go back to the finance committee and then ultimately to council. If for some reason you were to hire somebody and you wanted to pay them beyond the range for whatever reason, then that's something that would then go back to council. It's not the hiring of the person, but what that person would get paid. So that's why if to make a recommendation, I know this is kind of like an ad hoc committee, but to make a recommendation for the finance committee to then refer to council approving the comp scale should council and the members of this committee agree, and the members of the finance committee, it would just be, I would suggest the one with just the ranges, not the ones that had the specific jobs on the side. I just did that for your edification in looking at the document.
Thank
Susan,
you.
I-
This will,
Oh, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say this was a tremendous amount of work, and it's excellent. Just, you know, on top of
Yeah.
that.
It's refreshing, the level of professionalism. I would have to say, Susan, your experience is showing.
Thank you.
Tremendous.
Can I add one thing there?
Yours as well, Mr. Kennedy.
Oh, thank you. It was primarily Susan. So one thing I want to make sure that we address is the compensation schedule that we came up with is just base wage salary ranges. We really need to identify by position or type of position what we're going to do with fringe benefits. I mean, right now we're all over the block with how fringe benefits are managed for folks not under a collective bargaining agreement.
Mhm.
That would include things like longevity payments, whether somebody's eligible or not, benefits, what level of benefits they get, are they eligible for the health care waiver, that stipend that is being paid to people that don't take the health care. We need to look at what's the benefits that are with, the benefits that commensurate with some of the unions. Do we give the chiefs a uniform allowance? Do we give people things? Do we pay them for fitness tests? Are they eligible for payment over and above regular time? You know, usually these positions are exempt under FLSA, but in some cases, people are getting overtime for participating in situations that mirror the union agreements. I probably have a different perspective than Susan, but I think we need to get that completely locked up here sometime in the near future to avoid, first of all, any kind of audit issues, but also you're going to have to factor that into your analysis of what the compensation is. If you take some of these things away, but you award somebody additional salary to accommodate that, fine. But I think that has to be clear because in some cases, total compensation, including all forms of benefits, is really drastically different than the wage ranges that Susan came up with. So I just want to get that out there for everybody's
Well,
thinking at the.
I think this is a good meeting to discuss that and try and wrap it up, since we're talking about the compensation scale right now.
Well, and one other thing, I just wanted to point out, there are two positions that the FLSA did, it seemed odd, that two positions that seem to be in reverse. One is the city planner that is marked as an exempt position, but it really should be, so he's salary, but that's really a position I've never seen as exempt. They're usually not exempt. And then we have an assistant service director who is non-exempt, but usually when you're in that level of management, you are exempt. Those two positions, that was something that I did flag as a note as well. That if that's something to be discussed, and again, those positions, I know the one existed before I ever came here, so I don't know what history goes along with that, but just through my research, those two positions were a little unusual. How they were marked as exempt and non-exempt.
Well, I think we should make them uniform with all the other ones.
Well, usually that's defined in a personnel manual. I mean,
Yeah, Dennis, is our personnel manual finalized yet?
It is not. It is substantially
I
complete.
think we lost him.
There are a few matters left that Jeremy and I are going over.
Okay, do you foresee that to be within the next month or two, or what's the time frame on that?
I think so. Jeremy and I are actually having a meeting tomorrow to go over some outstanding matters, and that's one of them.
Okay, so, I mean, I don't see why they should be any different than all the other salaried non-union employees. Does anyone else have any, in terms of the exempt status, does anyone else have any other comments on that?
Well, I would reflect back to what Susan Drucker just said about not necessarily fully appreciating the history with regard to the assistant service director. And I think it ties in, at least in part, with it may be a similar form or a slightly different form of a common theme that we have found here, which is that there was a time under the previous administration where apparently fringe benefits and other benefits and were extended as opposed to just giving bona fide raises outright. And part of normalizing and making right and normalizing these things will be to make sure that we are compensating our employees to reflect what would have been or should have been properly, what should have been given as a proper raise back then, and making sure that we are not taking something away, even though the form of it done by the previous administration may not have been best. So I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but,
So-
but I'm highly confident that is why certain employees have certain benefits that where they should just be compensated on the pay. And I think
So-
that's why that the assistant service director is still collecting overtime, because it was easier to do that than it was to actually pay him what he should have.
Okay, so I mean, I would like other people's feedback. These are my thoughts. We have discussed as a council some of these issues more than once. I think that everybody who is currently hired should just be grandfathered into whatever they have right now, and it would be new hires that all of these updated salary definitions and salary compensations would apply to. What are everybody's thoughts on that?
Agree with that.
The only issue that I would be concerned about is, as the councilwoman mentioned earlier, I mean, if one puts together a personnel manual which sets out how things are done, I don't know, you might want to talk to the law director to see whether you're setting yourself up. If one person hired is getting something complete, salary and benefits, et cetera, are completely different than somebody who's grandfathered in.
Yeah, we actually spoke about this a few months ago, and I don't know if I spoke to Luke or someone else did. And we said, you can say grandfathered and you can actually put a date there.
Right.
And then that alleviates all of the legal issues.
Mhm.
But
So
that's how granular your personnel manual needs to be. I mean,
In this case, it does. Yeah. So if everybody agrees that everybody who is currently hired is grandfathered in, then we need to go through, obviously the assistant service director should not be receiving overtime, so he should be exempt. So I think Susan.
Saying he's grandfathered though.
Yeah.
That means his status wouldn't change. And really, that's the only
It's-
position we're going to be talking about, because the other position is going to take care of itself next week. So
Yeah, no. He
so
would be,
really, we only have that one position. And if it's the understanding of the administration that he's grandfathered, then we don't change him from non-exempt.
no, not him, but his position within
Right,
the
the position.
documents.
And,
Yeah.
and that's what I should be saying, the position, because the job description is not has nothing about names or anything. It's
Right.
a job description, and that's why it does say updated January 2021, I think, or maybe February, I don't know. But what I could do then is just add an asterisk at the bottom of that with a note about the exemption that once there's a change in that position will become exempt.
A footnote that clarifies
Something
it.
like that at the bottom of the job description with the date.
Okay. The other set of issues, Dennis, now there's differences between the police and fire benefits, fringe benefits, and the non-union fringe benefits. So do we know in other cities, does the police chief and do the fire chief get a clothing allowance? Do they get, all their other allowances? Do we know what happens in other cities?
Yeah, it's primarily, I'd say it's predominantly separate ordinances that govern any kind of extra pay over and above what the compensation rate is. Susan can probably remember back when we were in Solon, the fire chief had a uniform allowance. The police chief had a uniform allowance. There was adjustments based on the employees and their status, whether or not they were eligible for longevity. Here, there's just no consistency for that. So what I would really like to do, and again, I'm working backwards. When an auditor comes in and says, okay, Jane Doe got paid $122,612.
We lost.
$12. Show me how you got to that number, that we have an ordinance annual, that we have something that justifies or supports the payment cost of salary alone, so you avoid citation. But to your original question, yeah, most cities.
Okay, most cities have uniform and longevity allowances for chiefs.
Well, so most cities, you'll have uniform allowance. What the benefits that chiefs can get throughout cities can vary. The defining factor here is that it's all done by ordinance. So whether you want to give someone uniform, you want to give them overtime, you want to give them longevity, that all has to be done in ordinance, and you do it each separately for each thing. You don't,
Okay.
you don't say, oh, the police chief gets all of this by
A whole laundry list, yeah.
then it's to the person and not the position.
Right.
So you want to do it per the position. So a police chief would get this, an assistant fire, fire chief gets this much allowance, but the assistant fire chief usually gets something a little bit less than that. So that,
Okay.
at least that's how we did it. We had it step down based on seniority because of just uniforms and what you need with, and you get different stripes every time you're promoted. But the key is that what Dennis was saying, because Dennis, you keep getting cut off. So that's why I'm jumping in.
I just want everybody to know I bought a new router too, so I have no idea what's going on.
Okay. But the key is to have a piece of legislation approved by council for each of those, a position and what's that one benefit. So you really, since none of this has been done, you're probably talking maybe a dozen different pieces of legislation, but you really want to, if you really want a clean record of all that, that's how you.
Okay,
You have the appropriate supportive documentation for the auditor.
Yep, you got it.
Okay, so we definitely want that.
Mhm.
So the chiefs, we understand uniform longevity. What do other directors right now in the city have?
Well, one gets longevity, nobody else gets longevity. Some get food allowance.
What allowance?
Yeah, like I think they, right? Doesn't the two service guys get food allowance?
Yeah,
Food?
Yeah, what,
Boots.
Oh, boots.
Yeah, because they are outside in the element.
Boots,
Yeah, that's what-
okay.
It's like Harvey gets a uniform allowance and boot allowance and that with Gates Mills PD.
Right. It's really
Okay.
just, I think what really it probably would be good is just to maybe for Dennis to just, I'm sure Dennis already has an inventory of who's been getting what, because he's been trying to, that he's brought this up in the past. So maybe just break it all down and then you can see. It's not about picking and choosing, it's just saying who has what benefit and how to address it. And then if one person has a benefit that no one else has, I think you have to explain that, or else that might be a benefit that either everybody has to get then, or maybe that person shouldn't be getting. Because how do you justify
Oh.
director getting something that no one else gets?
Right, so again, we want to grandfather, it's going to be too confusing and too difficult with morale to start changing that up currently. So, but we want this in code as, as an ordinance as of X date, that this is what the position, is entitled to. So I think that's a good idea, Dennis. If you can go through each director and assistant director and tell us, within the next couple of weeks, what they are getting on top of their salary. And then we can all review that and come to a conclusion so we can, on the next meeting, so we can start getting all those ordinances approved. Now, the one thing that I also want to talk about, which is on top of this, is I know that many positions are getting paid for not taking insurance. And I want to kind of hear what the committee and council has to say about that, because that's another benefit that is pretty pricey.
That
And
is-
As I, can
Just
I
for your
ask a
benefit.
question?
It's, it includes union and non-union people that get that benefit, so.
So,
Okay,
but is there, in other words, if a spouse is getting insurance, that person can use the spouse's insurance or family members' insurance?
Right.
but they're still getting a dollar amount if they don't take it.
And the whole
That's-
idea is because then and I'll say this right now, I'm getting that, so I want everyone to know, but I'll speak. So I'll put that out on the table. I'm getting that paid for not taking insurance. What it does is then because then I'm not getting insurance, that I can then have family coverage, that then the city would be responsible for covering with all the medical bills that go with it. That's
Sure.
why people get paid to not take the insurance.
What was
Yep.
the payout for that? What do we
But-
pay
but-
for that benefit?
I think it's $250 a month for family.
Wow.
No,
Okay,
it's-
so wait a minute, you would get a family instead of just the single?
I get a family because if I didn't get the benefit, I would take the insurance.
Here is the issue on
Which
a,
would then cost the city probably what, $14,000 to $16,000 a year.
Instead of like 5 or whatever.
Right.
but can I say something? One of the things from a budget perspective, it's very hard to budget that way. I've been in a situation where I've had staff who are taking somebody, their spouse's benefits. Then all of a sudden you lose 2 or 3 people who were taking spouse's benefits, and you're paying full family insurance. And it can be, theoretically, I guess, Dennis, we do budget for that, correct? I mean,
Mhm.
so.
Yeah, my default, Stephen, is
I've
if
just gotten slammed.
we're not
with that.
100% sure that we have, we budget at the family.
Okay. So you do budget for everybody. Okay, well then that's good, because I've gotten slammed with that. I've learned the hard way. I mean, people
Now-
move on.
Yeah,
I
people
do know,
qualifying event or what have you. Right.
right, I do know from researching this before that many cities do actually give this insurance benefit. What are
Mhm.
people's thoughts on that?
I thought as we should continue.
Sounds win-win to me.
It's an
How does what we pay compare to other cities?
Yeah, and it's in the 3,
Dennis, you broke up. It's in what?
I think off the top of my head, it's in the middle. We're in the middle.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so,
I would tell you as an example, Solon would pay people after I'm trying to get my years right. I want to say hired after, it was like 89 or 92. So if you were hired prior to that date, you received 10% of your salary for not taking insurance. So, a police chief making 120 grand got an extra 12,000 grand. And then after that date, I believe it was 5 or 7% of your pay. So that's one of the higher scales. That was definitely, that's one that's at the higher end of the scale,
okay,
just to give you an idea. But that's my only frame of reference for that.
okay, so Dennis, for the next meeting, can you, by director, make a chart, what everybody is getting on top of their salary? So we can take a look at it and make a decision on how we want to write the ordinances up for the
Yeah.
future.
Yeah, I already have 95% of that done.
I have
Okay,
a question or confusion. Are there some people who are getting salary in lieu of a benefit other than insurance?
No, there's those additional items, Rick, that we talked about.
So they get, their salary hasn't been adjusted upward to account for some benefit that they actually
Right.
are deserving. Okay.
Susan, before we move on, when you were doing the salary ranges, was anyone out of whack? Like, did you have to adjust a director's compensation wage way higher for the range?
Oh, no. What I did,
Okay.
I first I did the average scale and created a range, just the numbers first. Then we did the positions, we leveled across the positions and the departments, and then I placed them where they were. So
Okay.
the only thing is, for example, let's just take, so I did take into consideration the years of an employee. So if somebody's been here a long time in a position, then, and let's just say I put them in the G category, they would be at the end of the G category because they've been here 15 years or plus. Whereas a newer employer, you're looking really around the midpoint range. So that's the only way I adjusted it. So those were a couple of things the mayor and I had talked about. Like I said, Mayor, this person, they could be a G or an H. And I don't know if those are the letters. I'm just giving you an example. A G or an H, but, with number of years. And then we came to an agreement of where they, where to place them then based on, rather than a low H, they should be a high G because they've been here 20 plus years. That kind of thing.
And our current ordinance says that council needs to pass the compensation ranges every 2 years. Is that correct?
I don't know that. I didn't think we really had.
I think that's
That was one of the
depending on
problems.
what
It would be a
positions.
good practice, I think. I don't think we've been doing that, but I think that basically every time there's a new council, it ought to be brought up again and either reaffirmed or adjusted or what have you. It should be addressed as a routine matter.
Actually, the compensation scale should really be reviewed every year, probably along with the budget prior to doing the budget, so that if you're going to do an increase in the compensation scale, that doesn't mean people get raises. It's just to make sure the compensation scale stays level with the, stays competitive with salaries in general. So,
The Cleveland Heights scale goes before the council.
I'm sorry, what's that?
Every year?
I believe it goes every year, but I know if it's not every year, it's every other year.
Yeah,
John,
it goes before council. It's just that I think the question is, I thought it was every 2 years.
John,
could be
don't
wrong.
you remember? I mean, I've seen it a bunch of times.
When, on the prior administration, we were doing it, the 1 year we did it like 2 or 3 times because we kept updating it because we were making new hires and people were
Right.
out of range. It was more out of necessity. It wasn't because we felt like doing it.
Right.
What I recall seeing are spot changes.
Yeah, that's what and we did that even recently.
Yeah, and right. And when I first looked these over, and this was with Mike Frederick, so this was some time ago, we saw that they were things that were already either out of date or people were already being paid, in some instances outside of the band. And some of those things have been since rectified, but the thing is those things were happening because probably they weren't being reviewed regularly. And it was something that we identified as something that we ought to normalize and do on a routine basis. And, this is work towards that. So whether it is annually, as Susan is suggesting now, or biennially, then either way, it ought to be routine. And as long as we, make it part of the regular review and make adjustments as appropriate.
So Dennis, on that spreadsheet that you will be sending all of us, can you just put a note to review the compensation scales biannually
Sure.
for an ordinance?
Is there something to reviewing the job descriptions as well on a regular basis?
That's a good idea.
Well, that's something that would be done administratively. The reason you set it up is because the reason you don't get job descriptions approved by council, you don't want legislation with that, is because you want to be able to change should a job be combined with something else or change throughout the year.
Right.
That's something
I
that,
wasn't suggesting that they needed council approval.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is though, that's something the mayor and I had discussed it. Now that we have them set, like now there's going to be this fresh folder of job descriptions that are marked, they're dated, they're descriptive. So now the next time you go for a job, whether if it's an existing job that he's hiring for, then you review the job description before you post that position. If it's a job, maybe that's going to be blended with another existing job, then that means we have to rewrite a job description for that. So, this is something that's meant to be ongoing anytime there's a change, a promotion, a new hire, somebody leaves the position. Anytime that happens, you should always go back and look at that position then of what's that job description saying? Are you going to fill that job again?
I certainly agree that those are events that should trigger a review, but also things change and
Sure.
there may not be an event, but the job may have evolved. So maybe annually you review all the descriptions.
Yeah,
when I reorganize the clerk's office and I want to change what my clerks do, I have to get the new title approved by council to add to my office. Like I changed a regular civil clerk into an accounting clerk. The accounting clerk position had to be approved by council and take the other clerk out.
Yeah, I know with the county and the state, the job descriptions were reviewed every year in conjunction with an employee evaluation. So you give the employee the opportunity to make changes to anything that's happened during the course of the year. The supervisor can, but it's a good basis for doing evaluation.
And that's the way we did it at the state as well.
Mayor, in the new
Yeah.
Updated handbook, is there a section that stipulates annual performance reviews?
We did
Yeah.
something with that.
I think there are,
Not specifically, but I know
I know we discussed it. I will have to see what finally made what's in the final draft.
Can you make sure that that's part of it tomorrow?
I will look at it.
Thank you.
Okay.
One other, can I ask another?
Yeah, sure.
Is any thought to doing a review of elected officials' compensation as part of this, or is that separate?
Oh, that's a good.
I don't think they can vote on their own, because that always takes place, it has to take place after the
Yeah.
election. But I mean, if it's something that hasn't been done,
Yeah, there's a,
comfortable for
I mean,
election
unless you,
to talk about that, but
it's never, but it's never done on a regular basis. I'm just suggesting maybe, you know.
It
Yeah,
probably should get done. I mean, both the mayor and the council, it hasn't changed in a long, long time. Probably since the mayor combined the position with safety director, I would say.
Yeah. I don't
Um,
think, I don't think anything, and that's, you're probably talking 10 years ago.
And if we made a decision, let's say today, wouldn't take place until after the election. So if there's a new council or a new mayor or whatever, or whoever is in that position in the next term would get that salary. So it wouldn't
Right.
go into effect today.
Right. You can't raise somebody's salary midterm. It can only go into effect for a new term.
So how does that work in other cities with council and mayor increases? Every 4 years? How does that work?
it depends.
It's different all over the block. Most cities I've been in, they do a kind of biennial review. In a lot of cases, more particularly for the council, because you want to make sure that the earnings are sufficient should OPERS change their minimum contribution levels. But it's usually every 2 years as part of a review of the compensation schedule to begin with. So just thought it might be something you want to consider on a more regular basis.
That makes sense, biannual to review it. It doesn't mean it has to be done, it doesn't mean there has to be a raise, but at least it's reviewed.
Yeah, it's, you still have to vote on it, but I mean, it
Right.
just makes it go through the process.
Okay, so if we can put a note also on that compensation spreadsheet.
If you make it a regular thing, then it doesn't seem political when you bring it up.
Right.
Agree with that,
Yep.
otherwise. it's
Yeah.
awkward.
Yep, that makes sense.
Okay.
Okay. Are there any other comments or questions before we start the conversation of what our objective is? Okay. So in order for this committee to be clear on why we're meeting and what our strategy is, it's common practice to have a strategic objective. You know, so we all have clarity and we don't start. Sometimes you can get into the weeds and you can get off topic. So I want to open it up to the group. You know, what do you feel this, you know, I can talk about it also, but what do you feel that what the goals are of this committee? And it could be more than one. It is going to be more than one. So.
Well, I mean, one thing that, am I on?
Yeah.
Oh, good. One thing that I've heard is, I mean, we really need to talk about, well, I won't call them unpopular, but long-term capital needs. I mean, frankly, it sounds like the buildings are falling down, for lack of a better term, you know, and developing some kind of long-term plan, where will, what will our municipal's buildings look like in 10 years? That sort of thing. I mean, where do we want to be?
Yeah. I mean, short-term needs are also, on the table there. So we can take.
There's things that keep cropping up, I mean, there's now an empty space on, Washington and Silsbee, and so.
No, I agree with you. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so long-term and short-term capital needs.
And that should include, I know we've discussed it, Mr. Kennedy had suggested we could also create a fund that will, over time, be used for fleets, whether it be police or fire or service, so that we're not playing catch up and we're not having to take that out of capital funds. Because they're
Right,
big
so
purchases.
we can clarify that more, long-term and short-term capital asset needs,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
I would say one of the outcomes should be a plan for facilities.
Mhm.
That's
Definitely.
And I'll get together with a couple group members and make sure that this gets, put together, worded nicely and everything, but internal controls and internal, I know Susan and Dennis, what would you say the most accurate verbiage for the documents that you created are? We're not really internal controls.
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
All of the internal documents that you just created.
Mm-hmm.
Developing a real structure, which didn't exist or existed poorly.
I think it's a foundation for the administration of the city departments, because everybody that really falls within these parameters that were included in the scale and on the job descriptions are part of the management team.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of what Barbara said. It's forming a structure foundation or who's ever in charge to use that team as, with the purpose of managing the city
A genuine,
to the best of its
um,
abilities.
yeah, a genuine fleshed out and concrete structure.
Is there a place for something about serving residents?
Yeah,
All of it.
definitely.
Yeah, all of it.
Building community?
Mhm.
If we're talking about structure, is there a place in this for the development of performance outcomes?
Hallelujah. Sorry.
We
Yeah.
still, we have no real performance outcomes
Correct.
that match with budgetary asks out of any of these departments.
Yeah, and that should probably be a meeting in and of itself.
Yes.
It'd be more than that, yeah.
Yeah. And I think we need to insert that within this planning document here.
Along the same lines, when ways of measuring success in achieving whatever objectives we decide.
Right.
Well, that's when we talk about performance outcomes, they're not outputs, they're outcomes.
Mhm.
So they have to be measurable.
Mhm. Smart
Mhm.
goals.
Yeah. that-
Oh, I thought
it's a part of-
the conversation was going towards performance of operational performance.
Yeah,
And yeah, operational performance, but also performance against the objectives that were set in the plan. Two different kinds of performance.
okay.
You want to develop a structure that can live regardless of who the administration is,
Mhm.
that has some kind of well-defined organizations. So that no matter who the next mayor is, the structure is already there for them to continue to carry out.
Correct.
Mhm.
For it to function optimally.
Exactly.
To that point,
Well, if-
I think it's appropriate to bring to the table one of Wynn's suggestions from our finance committee meeting, which is, does the structure of the city serve us? And I think the mayor chimed in with some examples of municipalities that do have a manager, that even in the city of Cleveland Heights, which is switching to a strong mayor system, is maintaining the presence of a trained professional manager. So I just, I wonder if there's an element of this that we can use to, identify whether or not our current structure serves us.
Yeah, I mean, in Cleveland Heights, it'll be, they will call it an administrator to, so,
Yeah, it is an administrator.
right, and Shaker does that, and there were other cities that do that. I mean, for that matter, Cincinnati does that. So there are, it is certainly, for brainstorming here over the possibility, and that's certainly one of them.
Okay, so,
Companies do it as well. Sometimes they're called
Mhm.
COO.
Right.
Yeah.
Chief
I
Operating
will-
Officer.
I will put together all of these ideas in a format that, we can finalize at the next meeting. I do feel that we need to have it, we need to insert another meeting to talk about the structure of the city and to talk about performance outcomes. That's definitely going to be one meeting. It might be two.
Mhm.
So I will revise, the plan here. We can definitely do multiple things at once and try to, because those are essential to everything that we're doing. If we don't do that, then, I don't think we succeeded in a strategic plan.
I do have a question. Most strategic plans start off with I don't want to say universal goals, but, you know, I mean, if I were asking, you know, how do we, you know, I would say, what will University Heights look like in 2035? You know, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
What are our goals? Probably too far out, but, you know, what kind of city do we dream to be? You know, I mean, that kind of discussion came up kind of yesterday during council when we were talking about, you know, we were talking about whether you're an urban city, whether, you know, the kind of housing, even when, is it Odd Dog, you know, talked about, you know, is this really a walkable city yet? And, you know, for those of us who've taken their lives in their hands and walked to Target, you know, I mean, I'm just using that as an example. What do we want this city to look like? And then how do we get there? You know, and that's everything from infrastructure to facilities to recreation to everything else, to how it's managed.
Yeah, I mean, this plan really is probably not just a one-year plan. I mean, when we originally spoke about this, we knew, you know, we kind of used the county's strategic plan as an overview, right? We knew that we could not accomplish everything that the county did in 1 year, but we did know that we have facilities that must be updated and or completely, you know, new facilities. We also knew that the way our long-term and short-term focus is not the way that it should be, right? It's not documented. It's not thought out. And we also knew that there were many internal kinds of issues that needed to be fixed. So that this is all kind of step one. And then we wanted to get to you know, where do our residents come into here? The more organic kind of conversation. And I think that could be year two, where we have, you know, marketing and how do we reach out and how do we make sure that we are the best city that we can be, and how are we, you know, proactive instead of reactive to residents' concerns. That's kind of the trajectory that we were going to go in here, because there were such pressing needs that we needed to take care of financially.
You know, it
And
was
that's-
just, sorry.
No, I completely agree with you, Steve.
You know, last night I had such a great University Heights moment. You know, I had to go out in bad weather. I, you know, stopped at Heinen's, stopped at Chocolate Emporium, and then stopped at Tibor's, and then was home in like 15, 20 minutes. And I'm going, wow, this is great. You know, this is why I live where I live, you know, those kinds of things. And, you know, it was one of those moments where you say, yeah, I know why I'm here. And so I kind of saying, how do we get people to that point where they're saying, this is why we're here, this is what we want out of a city, kind of thing.
Well, I think Michelle has laid out a structure that could answer that.
Yeah.
The plan, when it's finished, will have a vision out into the future, 3 years, 5 years. The goals that are near term are smaller goals.
But such essential ones to get anywhere else.
Mhm.
If
You have
we're
to
not
do things-
functioning efficiently, we can't do any of the other stuff.
Yeah, it's like pickup sticks.
Yeah, it's
You have
grand
to
to
do it
talk
in the
about
right
it,
order.
but unless you've got, you know, the basics sound and strong, rest of it won't happen. We're on the right path.
Okay, so we do need an executive session after this meeting. However, I just wanted to review what we spoke about in this meeting and what the next meeting is going to look like. Dennis is going to email out all of the directors' additional benefits, as well as some asterisks with making sure that we write up an ordinance to review compensation biannually and elected officials' compensations biannually. The mayor is going to be speaking with our labor attorney to finalize a handbook and making sure that we will be able to insert grandfather clauses as needed, as well as performance reviews annually. We discussed what a strategic objective will look like, and I will make a run at putting that all together, and we can make corrections as needed at the next meeting. The next meeting, I will invite the directors, the two chiefs, the service director, and the engineer to discuss their short-term and long-term needs. And then as a committee, we will discuss what that looks like in practicality. Is there anything that I missed or anything that anybody else wanted to add?
Yeah, one thing. So it's not just about the director benefits, it's really any full-time non-bargaining employee benefits.
Yes, I'm sorry, you're correct.
And then also with that next meeting, while we have Joe Chuney there, I think we should take advantage of his presence at the meeting to have him talk about the facilities RFP, what would be expected, because then if, I don't know how his contract works with council, but if council has to take action to give the mayor authority to have Joe go do the RFP or what have you, at least to get that started, because that's going to be a lengthier process.
It should also be noted that it isn't necessarily Joe that would be doing the RFP as much as there are people at GPD Group who would have this in their wheelhouse to do. So the presentation there, if we want the full presentation, Joe can only give us the 10,000 foot view. If we want to talk about it, then we need some GPD folks in to actually talk about it.
Okay,
But
I can get together with Susan and John and Dennis and try and see what the best way to do that is. If we just want Joe to come, or we want Joe to speak to them and then come,
Right.
you know.
Right. Because the other thing is we do have discussed facilities RFP for the April 14th meeting, if that, or, for not the next meeting, but the meeting after. So I don't know if we want to make, we shouldn't try to do too much at the next meeting,
Yeah, Susan just mentioned that it maybe if we could just get the 10,000 foot view next time, and then maybe have, his whoever in his company.
Before we go too deep.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
Okay, great. So I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I just would ask everybody that's just on the committee, not council, and not the mayor, Mrs. Drucker and Mr. Kennedy, if they could all stay on for the executive session. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Great night.
We need to make a motion.
Yeah, we need to make a motion.
I'll make a motion to.
Oh, wait, and then I have to stop the recording.
After our,
Yeah.
Let's make the motion first.
All right, so I'll make a motion to enter into executive session. It's 8:05.
I'll second. When we come out, we have to make a motion to go back into the regular committee meeting, right?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, it's recording.
Make a motion.
You want to make a motion? Someone?
I'll make a motion to come out of executive session and return to the strategic planning committee meeting.
And I'll second.
And I'll make a motion to adjourn the strategic planning committee.
Second.
All right, have a good night. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Night, everyone.
Right.